Hey guys, tonight we begin with something heavy but necessary. A time when the law itself was built to humiliate you, when your skin determined which door you walked through, which water you drank, and whether anyone would believe your pain. We're stepping into Jim Crow America, but not from the history books. We're stepping into it as a black woman. The load was double. The danger was constant. And the world expected you to carry it all with a smile. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations, you've just woken up in rural Alabama, 1935. The rooster hasn't crowed yet, but you're already awake because the day doesn't wait for black women. Your body aches from yesterday's labor and the day before that, and every day stretching back as far as you can remember. The mattress beneath you is thin cotton ticking stuffed with corn husks that crinkle when you shift. The cabin smells like wood smoke, lard, and the faint mustiness of clothes that never quite dry all the way. There's no running water. There's no electricity. The outhouse is 30 yards away in the dark, and you'll need to make that walk before the sun comes up. You swing your legs over the side of the bed, feet touching rough wooden planks that have been worn smooth in some places and splintered in others. The air is cool, not cold, but enough to make you reach for the shawl draped over the bedpost. Your children are still sleeping, 3 of them curled together on the other bed like puppies seeking warmth. Your husband left for the fields an hour ago. You can hear the distant sound of other men heading out, their voices low murmurs in the pre-dawn grey. Your day started the moment your eyes opened. Theirs started even earlier. Here's the thing about being a black woman in Jim Crow America. You weren't just living under segregation. You were living under layers of it. The law said you couldn't use white facilities, couldn't vote, couldn't testify against white people in court. But underneath those laws sat something older and uglier, the assumption that your body wasn't yours, your time wasn't yours, and your dignity was a luxury you hadn't earned. White women were fragile flowers to be protected. You were a mule to be worked. That's not metaphor. That's how the system actually functioned. Zora Neale Hurston would write that the black woman was the mule of the world, and she meant it literally. You carried what others refused to carry. You bore what others refused to bear. And you did it without the protection that society extended to almost everyone else. The cabin around you tells its own story. 2 rooms if you're lucky, 1 if you're not. Newspaper pages pasted on the walls for insulation. The headlines from years past now faded and yellowed, talking about events that happened in a world that barely acknowledges your existence. The gaps between the boards letting cold in winter and mosquitoes in summer. You've stuffed rags into the worst of them, but the wind still finds a way. The floor is bare wood that you scrub every Saturday on your hands and knees, keeping it clean enough that you can feel proud, even when you have nothing else to feel proud about. Your grandmother lived in a cabin like this after emancipation. Some things haven't changed as much as they should have. You cross the small room to the stove, a cast iron beast that dominates the corner. The fire from last night has died to embers, so you add kindling, blow gently until flames lick upward, and set the coffee pot on top. Coffee is a luxury, but you've learned to stretch it. Yesterday's grounds mixed with today's, producing something that tastes mostly like hot brown water with the memory of bitterness. But it's warm, and warm is something. You slice fat back, drop it into the skillet, and listen to it sizzle while you mix cornmeal and water for hoe cakes. This is breakfast. This is most meals, actually. Meat when you can get it, cornbread always, vegetables from the garden when they're in season. Hunger isn't a crisis. It's a companion you've learned to negotiate with. The garden out back is yours, one of the few things that truly belongs to you. Collard greens, sweet potatoes, tomatoes in summer, pole beans climbing up sticks you cut yourself from the woods. You know this soil intimately, which patches drain well and which hold water, where the morning sun hits first, how deep to plant each seed. Your grandmother taught your mother taught you, and you're teaching your daughter. This knowledge isn't in any book. It's in your hands, in the calluses on your palms, in the way you can tell by smell alone whether the soil is ready for planting. The garden feeds your family when nothing else does. In lean times, and there are many lean times, it's the difference between hungry and starving. You've developed a whole system for stretching food. Bones get boiled twice, sometimes 3 times, until every trace of marrow has given itself up to the pot. Vegetable scraps become stock. Stale bread becomes bread pudding, or gets crumbled into gravy to stretch it further. Nothing is wasted, because nothing can be wasted. You've learned to make poverty taste like love, seasoning beans with ham hocks until your children don't realize they're eating poor people's food. Other women in the neighborhood share recipes, trade secrets, compete gently over who makes the best cornbread or the smoothest sweet potato pie. In this small arena, you are artists. Your medium is limitation, and your masterpiece is keeping your family fed. By the time the children wake, you've already been working for an hour. You feed them quickly, braid your daughter's hair tight against her scalp because it needs to last the week, and check your son's shoes for holes that might need patching with cardboard. School exists for black children, but only barely. The building is a former church with a leaking roof and books so outdated they still reference presidents who died before your grandmother was born. The white school across town has a gymnasium. Yours has a wood stove and hope. Your children will walk 2 miles to get there, while white children ride buses that drive past without stopping. If your kids are late, they're punished. If they complain about the walk, you remind them that education is the one thing nobody can take away. You say it like you believe it. Some days you do. The hair braiding is its own ritual, passed down through generations. You part your daughter's hair with the end of a rat-tail comb, section by section, your fingers moving with practice speed. She sits between your knees on a low stool, trying not to squirm even when you pull too tight. You tell her stories while you work, the same stories your mother told you. Stories about clever girls who outsmarted foxes. Stories about ancestors who crossed impossible distances. Stories about a future where she won't have to bow her head to anyone. The braids are practical, yes, meant to last a week without attention, because there's no time for daily styling. But they're also armor. They're also identity. They're also love, woven strand by strand into patterns that connect her to everyone who came before. The schooling gap haunts you. You made it through 6th grade yourself, which was more than most in your generation. But you can see how the system is designed to keep your children in the same place you're stuck. The school year for black children is shorter, scheduled around planting and harvest, so they can work the fields. The teachers are dedicated but stretched impossibly thin, sometimes managing 50 students across 6 grade levels in a single room. Supplies are whatever the white schools threw away last year, chalk worn to nubs, maps with countries that don't exist anymore, arithmetic books with half the pages missing. And yet your children learn. They learn because their teachers refuse to let them fail. Because you drill them on reading and numbers at night by lamplight. Because the whole community understands that education is the long game, the slow escape route that might take generations to work. Miss Johnson, the teacher, is a woman you admire more than almost anyone. She went to a normal school 2 counties over, came back with a certificate and a mission. She makes $23 a month, less than half what white teachers earn, and she spends most of it on supplies for her students. You've seen her patch her own shoes with newspaper while making sure every child has a pencil. She boards with families in rotation because she can't afford her own place, which means she has no privacy, no space of her own, no life outside the classroom. But every morning she stands at that schoolhouse door, immaculate and fierce, ready to pour knowledge into children the world has already written off. Watching her, you allow yourself to imagine your daughter grown, standing at a door like that, changing lives the way Miss Johnson changes them. But you can't linger on the children's schooling because you have your own work waiting. 3 days a week, you walk to the Henderson house on the other side of town. Mrs. Henderson is a white woman who considers herself kind, which mostly means she doesn't yell as much as some employers. You cook her meals, clean her floors, wash her clothes, iron her husband's shirts until the creases could cut paper, and tend to her children with a gentleness she never extends to yours. You call her Mom. She calls you by your first name, or sometimes just girl, even though you're 34 years old with grey threading through your temples. The walk takes 45 minutes each way. There's a bus, but you'd have to sit in the back, and the white driver has a habit of pulling away while black passengers are still climbing on. Easier to walk, safer to walk. At least, your own 2 feet don't humiliate you. The route to the Henderson house takes you through 2 different worlds. You start in your neighborhood, where people wave from porches and children call out greetings, and the smell of breakfast drifts from every window. Then you cross the railroad tracks, the dividing line that might as well be a border between countries. The houses get bigger, the streets get paved, the lawns get greener because people have time and money to water them. You walk faster here, eyes down, making yourself small. White women clutch their purses tighter when you pass. White men look through you like you're made of glass. You've learned every shortcut, every alley, every path that minimizes contact. Some streets you avoid entirely because there are houses there where bad things have happened to women who look like you. The Henderson kitchen is where you'll spend most of your day. It's clean and bright, nothing like your own. Running water from a tap, an electric refrigerator that hums in the corner, a gas stove with knobs that click satisfyingly when you turn them. You're trusted to cook elaborate meals, but not to eat them. Lunch for you is whatever scraps you can take without being noticed. Cold biscuits and the fatty edges of ham that Mrs. Henderson trims away. You eat standing up quickly in the pantry where no one can see. Sitting at their table isn't just forbidden, it's unthinkable. The furniture in this house has a color line too. The work itself is endless. You wash dishes in water so hot it turns your hands red. Then you wash them again, because Mrs. Henderson found a spot on a glass. You scrub the bathroom on your knees, face close enough to the porcelain to count every speck, using cleaners that make your eyes water and your throat burn. You make beds with hospital corners, dust furniture that was already clean, polished silver that nobody uses. The labor isn't always necessary. Sometimes it's just performance, proof that you're earning your wage, evidence that Mrs. Henderson is running a proper household. You understand this game even if she doesn't. Your labor is part of her identity. Without someone to supervise, what would she do with her days? there's a particular cruelty to intimate knowledge of how the other half lives. You know exactly how soft Mrs. Henderson's sheets are because you wash and iron them. You know exactly how her bathroom smells like lavender and rose because you scrub it daily. You know the taste of the food you prepare because you test it for seasoning. Then watch the family eat while your own stomach growls. You go home at night to your corn husk mattress and your outhouse and your kerosene lamp, carrying in your body the memory of electric lights, and indoor plumbing and a gas stove that lights with the turn of a knob. Some days the contrast feels like violence. Other days you've gone numb to it. You're not sure which is worse. And here's where it gets complicated, because you're not just a worker in this house. You're also invisible and hypervisible at the same time. Mrs. Henderson will discuss her marriage troubles in front of you, like you're part of the wallpaper. She'll complain about her husband's drinking, her mother-in-law's criticism, her worry that she's getting fat. You nod, murmur sympathetically, keep scrubbing the pot in your hands. You know more secrets about this family than any of their white friends do. But if you ever repeated those secrets, if you ever presumed to have an opinion about them, you'd be fired and blacklisted before sundown. Your knowledge is power you can never use, so you file it away and keep working. Some days Mrs. Henderson gives you her old clothes. She presents them like gifts, and you're expected to be grateful. So you are, outwardly at least. The dresses are usually stained or out of fashion, things she'd be embarrassed to donate to her church. You take them home and remake them, taking in seams, letting out hems, transforming cast-offs into something your daughter can wear to Sunday service. There's a particular humiliation in wearing your employer's discards, but there's also a particular triumph in making them beautiful. You learn to sew from your mother, who learned from hers, all the way back to slavery times when black women made clothes for the whole plantation, and then, in stolen moments, made something fine for themselves. The needle in your hand connects you to all of them. The children you care for in this house will never know how much of their raising was done by you. You're the one who heats their bottles. You're the one who walks them through nightmares. You're the one who teaches them to tie their shoes and say please and thank you. When they fall down, they run to you before they run to their mother. When they're scared, your voice is the one that soothes them. You love them in a way, because you can't help it, because children are children regardless of whose children they are. But you also know that one day these same children will grow up and call you by your first name, will expect you to step off the sidewalk, will become the same white people who see you as less than human. That knowledge sits in your chest, like a splinter you can't remove. The danger, though. Let's talk about the danger, because it's always there, humming beneath the surface like electricity in the walls. Mr. Henderson comes home for lunch sometimes. He's a big man, red-faced and loud, and he looks at you in a way that makes your skin crawl. Not every day, not even most days, but enough that you've learned to keep the kitchen island between you, to never be alone in a room with him if you can help it, to make yourself small and uninteresting and invisible. Because if something happened, if he decided to take what he wanted, who would you tell? The police? They'd laugh you out of the station if they didn't arrest you for lying. Your husband? He'd want to kill Mr. Henderson, and then they'd kill him, and your children would have no father. So you manage. You calculate. You develop a sixth sense for when to leave a room and when to stay still and when to laugh at jokes that aren't funny, because laughter is a kind of armor. This isn't paranoia. This is survival math that every black woman in Jim Crow America learned to do. The Tuskegee Institute documented over 4,700 lynchings between 1882 and 1968, and those were just the ones that got recorded. Many victims were black men accused of looking at white women wrong, but black women were lynched too, beaten too, assaulted too. The crime of being black and female was that you were seen as unrapeable. The law didn't recognize it. The courts didn't prosecute it. Your body belonged to anyone who wanted to claim it, and your only protection was luck, strategy, and prayer. You've developed a whole vocabulary of deflection, ways to refuse without refusing, ways to disappear while still standing in plain sight. You know how to make yourself seem older than you are, less attractive, less available. You wear your wedding ring prominently, even though it's just a thin band of brass. You mention your husband in every conversation. You develop a slight limp, a persistent cough, anything that makes you seem less desirable as a target. Other women share these strategies in quiet conversations, comparing notes like soldiers comparing battle tactics. Because that's what it is, a war. And the enemy wears a friendly face and signs your paycheck. So you work through the afternoon with that knowledge sitting in your chest like a stone. You scrub floors on your hands and knees because Mrs. Henderson prefers it that way, says the mop doesn't get into corners properly. Your knees ache, your back screams. The lye soap cracks your hands until they bleed in the creases. But you keep working because the alternative is worse. $3 a week, sometimes $4 if Mrs. Henderson is feeling generous, or if there's a party to prepare for. That money feeds your children, patches your roof, pays the poll tax that theoretically allows your husband to vote, though he never actually can, because the registrar keeps losing his paperwork. Every dollar is survival, and survival doesn't leave room for pride. By late afternoon, the Henderson children come home from their school, the good school, the one with new textbooks and actual science equipment. They're nice kids mostly. The youngest one, a girl about your daughter's age, sometimes follows you around the kitchen asking questions. What's that spice? Why do you tie your hair up? Can you teach me that song you were humming? You answer patiently because she's a child and doesn't know any better. But there's something that twists in your chest when you think about how different her life will be from your daughter's. She'll go to college. She'll have choices. She'll grow up believing the world is fair because for her, it mostly will be. The walk home takes longer than the walk there because your legs are tired and the evening air is thick with humidity. You pass through the white part of town first, careful to keep your eyes down, to step off the sidewalk if a white person approaches, to make yourself unthreatening in 100 small ways that have become automatic. A police car rolls past slowly, and you feel your heart rate spike even though you've done nothing wrong. Doing nothing wrong has never been protection enough. You know women who got arrested for sass, for looking uppity, for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The jail is not somewhere you want to go. Things happen to black women in that jail that don't get written in any report. Once you cross into the black part of town, your shoulders drop slightly. Here at least you can breathe. The houses are smaller, shabbier, but they're yours. Neighbors wave from porches. Children play in dusty yards. The smell of dinner cooking drifts from open windows, fatback and greens and cornbread. The same meal echoing from house to house because everyone's working with the same limited ingredients. There's a church on the corner, white-painted clapboard with a steeple that leans slightly to the left. On Sundays, you sing there until your voice goes hoarse. And for those few hours, you feel something like whole. But tonight is Wednesday, and there's more work waiting. Your own house needs cleaning. Your children need feeding. The garden needs watering. Your husband comes home with dirt ground into every crease of his skin, exhausted from 12 hours of labor that paid him half what the white farmhands make. You heat water for him to wash, serve him the best portion of whatever you've managed to cook, and listen while he talks about his day. His voice is heavy with frustration he can't show anywhere else. The foreman called him boy. A white worker half his age got promoted over him. He knows things are unfair. He also knows there's nothing to be done about it. Not right now. Not without dying. So he swallows it down, same as you do, and you both keep moving forward because stopping isn't an option. Your marriage isn't the romance novels Mrs. Henderson reads. It's something harder and maybe more real. You and your husband are partners in survival, yoked together by necessity and children, and a love that's been weathered by forces neither of you can control. There are tender moments, his hand finding yours in the dark, his pride when your son brings home good marks from school, the way he still calls you pretty even when you feel worn to nothing. But there's also the weight of what you can't talk about, the fear you both carry, the anger you can't express, the dreams you gave up so long ago you barely remember what they were. Sometimes you look at white couples walking down the street, holding hands without worry, and you wonder what it would feel like to love without the shadow of terror hanging over everything. You worry about what this world is doing to your husband's spirit. He used to laugh more. He used to have plans. When you first married, he talked about saving enough money to buy your own land, maybe start a small business, build something that belonged to your family alone. 10 years later, you're still sharecropping, still owing more at the end of each year than you earned, still trapped in a system designed to keep you trapped. You see how the weight of it bends him. Some nights, he doesn't talk at all, just sits by the stove staring at nothing, his hands hanging loose between his knees. You don't know how to help him. You barely know how to help yourself. So you sit beside him in silence, your shoulder touching his, offering the only thing you have left to offer: presence, witness, the simple promise of not being alone. After dinner, you finally sit down. Your body feels like it's made of stones. Your feet throb, your hands are swollen. But there's mending to do. So you thread a needle by lamplight and start patching your son's pants while your daughter reads aloud from a school book, stumbling over words but trying so hard you could cry. This is the moment you live for, the quiet hour when your family is together and safe, and the white world feels far away. Tomorrow you'll wake up and do it all again. But right now, in this small circle of lamplight, you are enough. You have enough. You allow yourself to believe that somehow, someday, things will be different for your children. The medical situation deserves its own attention because it was its own special kind of horror. When you got sick, and you did get sick, because your body was worked past breaking on a regular basis, your options were limited. White hospitals either refused black patients entirely or relegated them to basement wards where care was an afterthought. The black hospital, if your town had one, was underfunded and overcrowded, staffed by dedicated physicians who had too many patients and too few supplies. A serious illness could bankrupt your family. An emergency might simply kill you before help arrived. You remember when your neighbor's boy got his hand caught in a cotton gin. The screaming could be heard 3 fields away. They loaded him in a cart and drove to the white hospital, the closest one, and were turned away at the door. By the time they got to the black clinic 20 miles further, the hand couldn't be saved. He was 12 years old and would spend the rest of his life learning to do everything with one hand because white doctors couldn't be bothered to treat a black child. Stories like this were common. Everyone knew someone who died or been maimed because of delayed care. You learned to treat what you could at home: poultices for infections, willow bark tea for fever, prayers for everything else. The old women in your community carry medical knowledge that has no formal name. They know which roots break fevers and which herbs ease childbirth. They know how to set bones and staunch bleeding and recognize the signs of illnesses they have no ability to treat. This knowledge came over on slave ships and survived because it had to. When doctors wouldn't come and hospitals wouldn't open their doors, this was what stood between your people and death. You've learned some of it yourself. Remedies passed from your grandmother to your mother to you. Your daughter watches you carefully when you prepare medicines, storing the knowledge against a future where she, too, might have no one else to rely on. Childbirth was particularly dangerous. Black maternal mortality rates were astronomical compared to white women's, not because your bodies were weaker, but because the system didn't care if you lived. Midwives delivered most black babies in the rural South, skilled women who'd learned their craft from grandmothers and great-grandmothers going back to slavery times. They did remarkable work with almost nothing. But when complications arose, when bleeding wouldn't stop or babies got stuck, there was often nowhere to turn. You'd hear about women who died in labor because the white hospital wouldn't admit them, or who lost babies because the doctor took too long to come to the black part of town. Every pregnancy was a gamble. Every safe delivery was a small miracle. You've had 3 children and 2 that didn't make it. The first loss happened early, a miscarriage, while you were working in Mrs. Henderson's kitchen. You finished your shift before going home because you couldn't afford to lose the day's wages. The second was a boy who lived 3 days before fever took him. You buried him in the church cemetery in a box your husband made from scrap lumber, and you planted flowers on his grave that bloom every spring. You don't talk about them much, these lost children, but they live in a corner of your heart that never stops aching. Other women understand. Almost everyone has lost someone. You share this grief in glances, in quiet conversations after church, in the way you hold other people's babies a little tighter because you know how easily they can be taken. And if you needed to prevent pregnancy, well, good luck with that. Contraception existed but wasn't easily accessible, especially for poor black women in the rural South. You might hear about diaphragms or douches from other women, whispered information passed along like contraband. Some women relied on extended breastfeeding to space their children. Others used herbal remedies of uncertain effectiveness. The rhythm method required counting days on a calendar, which required having a calendar and enough control over your own body to say no on the risky days, neither of which was guaranteed. So families grew larger than resources could support, and women wore their bodies out with pregnancy after pregnancy, aged before their time by the sheer physical toll of reproduction. Let's talk about the violence more directly, because it shaped everything. The threat wasn't abstract. It was as real as the ground under your feet. Black women in Jim Crow America lived with the knowledge that their bodies could be violated at any moment and there would be no justice. White men who assaulted black women faced virtually no legal consequences. Courts routinely dismissed cases or found defendants not guilty regardless of evidence. The assumption built into the legal system was that black women were promiscuous by nature, couldn't really be raped because you were always willing, or at least never unwilling in a way that mattered. This wasn't just individual cruelty, it was systematized impunity. And the violence wasn't only sexual. Black women were beaten, whipped, and murdered for infractions real and imagined. Speaking disrespectfully to a white person could get you killed. Being in the wrong place at the wrong time could get you killed. Existing while black and female in a space where a white person felt you didn't belong could get you killed. The famous case of Mary Turner in 1918 illustrated the depths of this brutality. 8 months pregnant, she spoke out against the lynching of her husband and was herself lynched, her baby cut from her body and stomped to death by the mob. This wasn't ancient history. This was within living memory. Women who survived into the 1960s and 1970s remembered these horrors directly. The terror was fresh. So you learned to navigate. You developed what scholars later called the culture of dissemblance, a protective practice of hiding your true feelings, your real opinions, your authentic self behind a mask of deference and compliance. You smiled when you wanted to scream. You said yes, ma'am, when every cell in your body wanted to say something else entirely. You made yourself smaller, quieter, less threatening, because visibility could be fatal. This wasn't cowardice, it was intelligence. It was the accumulated wisdom of generations of black women who'd figured out how to survive in a world designed to destroy them. But here's the thing that doesn't get talked about enough. Within this crushing system, black women built worlds. They created spaces of love and resistance and joy that white supremacy couldn't touch. The church was one such space. On Sunday mornings, you put on your best dress, the one you'd sewn yourself from flour sacks and imagination, and you walked into a building where your humanity was never questioned. The preacher spoke of freedom, using biblical language that everyone understood, had double meanings. The choir sang songs that had carried your ancestors through slavery and would carry you through this. For a few hours, you were seen. You were valued. You were beloved of God. The music alone was worth everything. Songs that had been passed down through generations, spirituals that encoded messages of escape and resistance, hymns that promised a better world even if you couldn't reach it in this life. When the whole congregation lifted their voices together, something happened that's hard to describe. The walls seemed to expand. The ceiling seemed to lift. For those few minutes, you weren't tired, you weren't scared, you weren't invisible. You were part of something larger than yourself, connected to everyone who had sung these songs before and everyone who would sing them after. The church gave you back your name when the world tried to take it away. Sunday was also the one day you could truly rest. After service, families gathered for meals, spreading food across makeshift tables in the churchyard or packing into someone's home. These were the moments when laughter came easily, when children ran wild without fear, when adults could set down their masks and be fully themselves. The women traded stories and recipes. The men talked politics in low voices, debating strategy and timing, and how long the current order could possibly last. Young people flirted under the watchful eyes of their elders. Old people sat in corners and remembered, their presence a living link to the time before, when things were even harder, and somehow people survived anyway. Women's clubs and mutual aid societies were another kind of sanctuary. Black women organized themselves into groups that provided everything from burial insurance to scholarships to emergency assistance for families in crisis. They raised money for schools, lobbied for better conditions, and created networks of support that stretched across communities. The National Association of Colored Women, founded in 1896, brought together local clubs into a national movement with the motto "Lifting as we climb." These weren't social gatherings for ladies with too much time. They were survival infrastructure, built brick by women who refused to wait for the white world to save them. And in your own home, in that small cabin with the corn husk mattress and the temperamental stove, you created something precious. You told your children they were smart and beautiful and capable of anything, even when the world told them otherwise. You taught them history that schools wouldn't teach, Stories of resistance and triumph that proved black people had always been more than victims. You braided your daughter's hair and told her she was descended from queens. You looked at your son and told him his life mattered, preparing him for a world that would insist it didn't, while also preparing him to survive that world long enough to change it. The emotional labor was immense. You carried not just your own trauma, but the trauma of everyone around you. You were the one who held the family together when your husband came home broken by another day of degradation. You were the one who explained to your children why they couldn't drink from certain fountains, couldn't swim in certain pools, couldn't be children in the carefree way white children were. You were the one who absorbed the fear and the rage and the grief and somehow transmuted it into something your family could survive. This work is invisible in most histories. It was the most important work of all. Your body bore the evidence of all this carrying. By 40, you moved like a woman twice your age. Your hands were rough as leather. Your back never fully straightened anymore. You'd lost teeth because dental care was a luxury. You had pains you didn't mention to anyone, because mentioning them wouldn't help and might worry your family. The average life expectancy for black women in this era was significantly shorter than for white women, and the gap wasn't genetics. It was the accumulated weight of discrimination pressing down year after year until something gave out. But you kept going. Every morning, you swung your legs over the side of that bed, felt the rough wooden floor under your feet, and started again. You did it for your children, yes, but also for yourself, for the stubborn insistence that your life meant something even when everything around you said otherwise. You did it because giving up wasn't actually an option. The alternative to survival was death, and death meant the system won. So you lived, defiantly, exhaustedly, gloriously. The resistance took many forms. Sometimes it was the quiet sabotage of slowing down work, breaking things accidentally on purpose, taking small revenges that couldn't be traced. Sometimes it was the open defiance of women like Ida B. Wells, who documented lynching with meticulous fury and dared white America to look at what it was doing. Sometimes it was the organized resistance of the civil rights movement, which was built on the labor of black women long before it had famous male spokesmen. Rosa Parks didn't just spontaneously decide to keep her seat on that bus. She was a trained organizer with years of activist work behind her. The movement that changed America was planned in church basements and kitchen tables by women whose names most people never learned. And sometimes resistance was simply survival. Getting up each day, raising children, maintaining love in the face of hatred. These weren't passive acts. They were radical affirmations of humanity in a system designed to deny it. Every black woman who lived through Jim Crow and came out the other side with her spirit intact was a revolutionary, whether she ever marched in a protest or not. The night is settling in now, and you're finally lying down. The corn husks crinkle beneath you. Your husband's breathing has steadied into sleep. Through the thin walls, you can hear the sounds of the neighborhood quieting down. A dog barks somewhere. A baby cries briefly and is soothed. The air smells like wood smoke and the jasmine that grows wild along the fence line. Tomorrow, you'll wake before dawn and do it all again. The Henderson house, the scrubbing, the careful navigation of danger, the long walk home. It never ends, this work of staying alive. But tonight, in this small space you've carved out of a hostile world, you let yourself rest. Your body is tired in ways that sleep can't fix, but you close your eyes anyway. Maybe you dream of your grandmother, who was born in slavery and somehow survived to hold you as a baby and tell you stories about a time before the war. she used to say that freedom wasn't a place you arrived at, but a thing you built, day by day, choice by choice. One small act of dignity at a time. You didn't understand her then. You're starting to understand her now. Maybe you dream of your children grown and free, living in a world you can barely imagine, where they walk through front doors and drink from any fountain, and their children's children have never known the weight you carry. Maybe you dream of nothing at all, your mind finally empty, your body finally still. The Jim Crow era lasted roughly from the 1870s to the 1960s. Nearly 100 years of systematic degradation, terror, and oppression. And black women carried that weight every single day, in their bodies and their spirits and their bones. They carried it while also carrying families, communities, and the seeds of a freedom movement that would eventually bring the whole rotten system down. So tonight, as you lie in your modern bed, with your modern comforts, with laws that, at least on paper, say you're equal, with doors that open to you that once were closed, spare a thought for those women. The ones who scrubbed floors and bit their tongues and walked past buses that wouldn't stop for them. The ones who buried children and endured violations and still somehow found the strength to love and hope and fight. They built the world you live in now with their hands, their hearts, their impossible resilience. They didn't just survive Jim Crow. They outlasted it. And that's not just history, that's a miracle. One exhausted, stubborn, glorious day at a time. You step off the Frisco Railroad platform in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the first thing that hits you isn't the sight of the city, it's the smell. Coal smoke from the trains mingles with something sweeter. Maybe cornbread frying somewhere nearby. Maybe the honeysuckle climbing up a fence post along the tracks. The year is 1921, and you've come to Greenwood because someone back home told you this was the place where a black man could own something, the place where a black woman could run a business and have her name painted right there on the storefront window for everyone to see. You've heard the stories, and now you're here to find out if they're true. The Frisco tracks run right through the middle of Tulsa, and that's no accident. On one side sits white Tulsa, with its oil money and its department stores and its laws about where you can and cannot walk after dark. On the other side sits Greenwood. The tracks aren't just steel and wood. They're a border, a boundary, a reminder that America has rules about who belongs where. But here's the thing. On this side of the tracks, something impossible has grown. You cross over and the world shifts. The dirt streets are packed firm from foot traffic and automobile tires. The buildings rise 2 and 3 stories high. Brick and wood frame structures with painted signs advertising everything from groceries to legal services to hot tamales. People move along the sidewalks with purpose, dressed in clothes that would turn heads anywhere. Men in pressed suits and polished shoes. Women in dresses that catch the May sunlight. Children running errands or chasing each other between the storefronts. This is Greenwood Avenue, and it's alive in a way you didn't expect. You've lived under Jim Crow your whole life. You know the weight of it, the way it presses down on your shoulders every time you step outside. You know the drinking fountains you can't use, the restaurants that won't serve you, the hotels that close their doors before you even reach the threshold. You know the look in certain white folks' eyes, the one that says you're less than, you're nothing. You're invisible except when you're in the way. But walking down Greenwood Avenue, something loosens in your chest. Here, the drinking fountains are yours. The restaurants are owned by people who look like you. The hotel on the corner, the Stratford, that's black-owned too. 4 stories of red brick rising up like a promise. You can walk into any of these establishments and be treated like a customer, like a human being. like somebody worth serving. The prosperity isn't a rumor. It's right here in front of you, brick by brick, business by business. Within these 35 blocks, there are grocery stores and meat markets, 2 newspapers, a hospital, a library, 2 theatres, a bus system, and over 600 businesses in total. Doctors, lawyers, dentists, real estate agents, all of them black, all of them serving a community that white Tulsa refuses to acknowledge as anything other than a problem, to be contained. But contained isn't the right word. What's happening here isn't containment, it's creation. Forced by segregation to build their own world, the people of Greenwood built one worth living in. You find a room at a boarding house on Archer Street, run by a woman named Mrs. Jackson, who insists you call her by her first name, which is also Mrs. Jackson, because she hasn't gone by anything else in 30 years, and she's not about to start now. The room is small but clean, with a metal bed frame, a washstand in the corner, and a window that looks out onto the street below. The wallpaper is faded roses, and the floor creaks when you walk, but the sheets smell like lye soap and sunshine, and there's a pitcher of water waiting for you when you arrive. Mrs. Jackson tells you breakfast is at 6:30, dinner at 6, and if you miss either one, that's your business, but don't expect her to save you a plate. The cost is $3 a week, which is reasonable, and she expects it. Payment on Fridays, because Saturday is for the Lord's business, and Sunday is for rest. That first night, you lie in bed listening to Greenwood breathe. Through the open window comes the sound of laughter from somewhere down the block, the tinny notes of a piano drifting from one of the jazz clubs, the bark of a dog, the rumble of an automobile engine. Somewhere nearby, someone is cooking greens, and the smell makes your stomach growl even though you just ate. The bed springs squeak when you shift, and the pillow is lumpy. But there's something else in the air tonight, something that feels like possibility. You close your eyes and try to imagine what tomorrow will bring. Morning in Greenwood starts before the sun clears the horizon. You wake to the smell of coffee and bacon drifting up from Mrs. Jackson's kitchen, and by the time you've washed your face and pulled on your clothes, the house is already humming with activity. 2 other boarders sit at the long wooden table in the dining room, shoveling scrambled eggs and grits onto their plates, while Mrs. Jackson presides over the stove like a general commanding troops. She hands you a cup of coffee without asking if you want one, and the first sip is strong enough to make your eyes water. This is not coffee for the faint of heart. This is coffee that expects you to get things done. After breakfast, you step outside into a world already in motion. Greenwood Avenue stretches before you, lined with businesses that are just opening their doors for the day. Shopkeepers sweep the sidewalks in front of their stores. A delivery truck rumbles past, loaded with crates of vegetables for one of the grocers. 2 women walk by carrying baskets, their conversation floating in fragments. Something about a church, social. Something about a dress that needs hemming. Something about the price of flour going up again. The air smells of dust and motor oil, and the faint sweetness of fresh bread from the bakery on the corner. You walk north along the avenue, taking it all in. Here's Williams Confectionery, owned by John and Lula Williams, who built their candy and ice cream shop into one of the most successful businesses in the district. The display window shows rows of chocolates, peppermint sticks, and glass jars of penny candy that make children press their faces against the glass. Next door is a dress shop with mannequins in the window, wearing the latest fashions, hems rising scandalously high by traditional standards, but perfectly in line with what the magazines are showing. A barbershop with 4 chairs, all of them occupied. the conversation inside loud enough to hear from the street. Something about baseball, something about politics, something about a man who owes another man money and won't pay up. What strikes you is how much commerce happens within these few blocks. White Tulsa won't serve black customers, won't let them try on clothes, or eat at lunch counters or stay in hotels. So Greenwood serves itself. Every dollar spent here circulates 6 times before leaving the community, passing from hand to hand like a living thing. You buy groceries from Mr. Simon's store. Mr. Simon pays his supplier, another black businessman. That man pays his employees, who spend their wages at the barber shop, the dress shop, the restaurant on the corner. The money keeps moving, keeps working, keeps building. It's economic self-sufficiency born from exclusion, and it works better than anyone could have predicted. The Dreamland Theatre sits at the heart of the district, a 700-seat movie palace that shows the latest films and hosts live performances on weekends. The marquee advertises something starring Douglas Fairbanks, but you're more interested in the fact that you can walk right up to the ticket window and buy a seat without being told to go around back, without being directed to a cramped balcony, without being made to feel like your money is somehow dirtier than anyone else's. Inside, the seats are upholstered in red velvet, worn soft from years of use. The ceiling is painted with stars, and on Saturday nights, a live band plays before the picture starts. For a few hours, you can sit in the dark and watch stories unfold on a screen, and forget that 30 blocks away, the world has different rules. But the Dreamland isn't the only theatre. The Dixie Theatre operates just down the street, offering competition and choice, because even entertainment here follows the laws of commerce. If one theatre's prices climb too high or its programming grows stale, there's another option. This kind of competition, healthy and productive, exists throughout Greenwood. 2 newspapers, multiple grocers, barbershops on every other block. The market works here because the market is allowed to work, because black customers have somewhere to take their business if they're not satisfied. It's capitalism functioning as advertised, which makes it remarkable only because it's so often denied to people who look like you. The Williams Building stands 3 stories tall, one of the most impressive structures in the district. On the ground floor, there's a grocery store and a confectionery. Upstairs, there are professional offices and apartments. The building has its own electricity, supplied by a generator that John Williams installed himself. At night, the lights glow warm against the darkness, a beacon visible for blocks. People call it a symbol, and they're right. But it's also just a building that someone dreamed up and then made real through work and will and the stubborn belief that better was possible. You find work at a print shop on Greenwood Avenue, setting type for one of the local newspapers. The work is precise and tedious, arranging tiny metal letters in wooden frames to spell out the stories that will fill tomorrow's pages. The shop smells of ink and paper and machine oil, and by the end of each day your fingers are stained black and your back aches from bending over the type cases. But the pay is fair, $2 a day, and the owner, a man named Mr. Smitherman, treats his employees like human beings. He asks about your family, remembers your name, pays you on time and in full. These things shouldn't feel remarkable, but in 1921 America, they are. The newspaper you're printing isn't just any paper. It's the Tulsa Star, one of 2 black newspapers serving the Greenwood community. Mr. Smitherman founded it himself, and he uses its pages to advocate for civil rights, to report on injustices, to celebrate the achievements of black Tulsans that white papers won't cover. The paper costs 5 cents, and people read it like scripture. passing copies from hand to hand, discussing articles over dinner tables and in barbershop chairs. Information here isn't just entertainment, it's survival. It's knowing what's happening in the world, what threats are gathering, what opportunities might be coming. Mr. Smitherman believes the pen is mightier than the sword, and he wields his with precision and purpose. The other newspaper, the Oklahoma Sun, offers a different voice, and the two publications sometimes clash in their editorials, debating strategies for advancement, arguing over which politicians deserve support, disagreeing about tactics while agreeing on goals. This too is a sign of health. A community that can sustain two newspapers, two perspectives, two visions of the future, is a community with depth. The readers benefit from the competition, getting more coverage, more analysis, more information than either paper alone could provide. You set the type for both sometimes, when one shop is overloaded and needs extra hands, and you notice how the stories differ even when they cover the same events. Truth, you learn, has many angles. On Sundays, Greenwood transforms. The business district goes quiet as shops close and families dress in their finest for church. Mount Zion Baptist Church rises at the corner of Eastern Street, its brick facade and stained glass windows a testament to what the congregation built together, dollar by dollar, brick by brick. The sanctuary seats 1,000 people, and on Sunday mornings it fills to capacity. The choir's voices lift toward the rafters, harmony so rich they seem to vibrate in your chest. The preacher speaks of Moses and Pharaoh, of deliverance and promised lands, and everyone in the pews knows he's not just talking about ancient history. He's talking about here. He's talking about now. But Mount Zion isn't the only congregation. Vernon AME Church draws its own crowd, as does the First Baptist Church, and half a dozen smaller congregations scattered throughout the district. The churches serve functions beyond the spiritual. They're meeting halls and community centers, places where mutual aid societies gather and young people caught under watchful eyes. The preachers know everyone's business, which means they know who needs help, who's struggling, who might benefit from a quiet word with a potential employer. The offering plates that pass through the pews fund more than operations. They fund scholarships and emergency assistance and community improvements that benefit believers and non-believers alike. After services, families gather for Sunday dinner. Long tables laden with fried chicken and collard greens, macaroni and cheese and sweet potato pie. The food is abundant, a celebration of making it through another week, a defiance of the scarcity that defines so many black lives elsewhere. Children run through yards while adults sit on porches, fanning themselves in the spring heat, catching up on gossip and news. The laughter carries on the warm air, mixing with the smell of cooking and the distant sound of someone practicing piano scales. This is community. Not the romanticized version you read about in books, but the real thing, messy and complicated and alive. The homes in Greenwood range from modest shotgun houses to substantial 2-story residences with manicured lawns. Some families have been here for decades, arriving during the land runs of the late 1800s or following the expansion of the oil industry in the early 1900s. Others, like you, are newcomers, drawn by word of mouth and the promise of something better. The houses might not look like much compared to the mansions of White Tulsa, but they're owned, not rented. That distinction matters. When you own the roof over your head, nobody can put you out on a whim. Nobody can raise your rent to force you somewhere else. You plant roots in soil that belongs to you. The prosperity isn't evenly distributed, of course. Some families live comfortable lives with automobiles and fine furniture and vacations to Kansas City. Others scrape by, working multiple jobs to keep food on the table and children in school. There are people in Greenwood who've never known anything but struggle, even here in this place of relative abundance. But the difference is that here, struggle leads somewhere. Here, a man who starts with nothing can build something. Here, a woman who works hard can open her own shop, hire her own employees, pass something down to her children. The ladder exists, and its rungs are within reach. You settle into a rhythm as the weeks pass. Work at the print shop Monday through Saturday. Church on Sundays. Dinner at Mrs. Jackson's table, where the conversation ranges from politics to recipes to speculation about who's courting whom. Some evenings you walk down to one of the jazz clubs on Admiral Street, where the music spills out the windows and couples dance in the warm night air. The bands play until well past midnight, horns and drums and pianos weaving together into something that makes your feet move without permission. You're not a dancer, never have been, but here in the darkness of the club, pressed close among strangers who feel like family, it doesn't matter. The music doesn't judge. The jazz clubs attract musicians from across the region, players who've heard about Greenwood's scene and want to be part of it. Some nights you recognize songs from the phonograph records that play in shops during the day. Other nights, the music is entirely improvised, musicians responding to each other in real time, building something that's never existed before and will never exist again. The audience participates too, calling out encouragement, clapping on the offbeats, creating an atmosphere that feels electric and sacred simultaneously. This is black art for black audiences, performed in black-owned spaces, and the freedom of it shows in every note. The Stratford Hotel becomes a landmark in your mental map of the district. It's where important visitors stay when they come to Greenwood, where businessmen hold meetings and organizations host events. The lobby has marble floors and velvet chairs, and a sense of grandeur that seems almost impossible given where you are. But that's the thing about Greenwood. It refuses to accept the limitations others try to impose. If white hotels won't accommodate black guests, fine. Build your own hotel, make it finer than theirs, fill it with people who have money to spend and dignity to spare. Let them see what's possible when talent isn't wasted and ambition isn't crushed. The hotel's dining room serves meals that rival anything in White Tulsa, prepared by cooks who learned their craft in the finest kitchens and brought that knowledge here. Traveling businessmen, entertainers passing through, dignitaries visiting from other cities, they all find their way to the Stratford's tables. The conversations over those meals shape policy and commerce, forge alliances and settle disputes. What looks like a simple hotel is actually a hub, a center of gravity around which much of Greenwood's business revolves. Dr. A.C. Jackson lives on a quiet street in the northern part of the district. He's considered one of the finest surgeons in the region, black or white, and patients come from across Oklahoma to seek his care. The Mayo brothers themselves, those famous physicians from Minnesota, have praised his skill. In a just world, Dr. Jackson would practice at the finest hospitals, train the next generation of surgeons, receive the recognition his talents deserve. In 1921 America, he operates out of a hospital in the Black District because the white hospitals won't grant him privileges. It's their loss, truly, but it's also Greenwood's gain. When you need surgery, you want Dr. Jackson's hands holding the scalpel. Everyone knows this. Everyone benefits. The medical community in Greenwood extends beyond Dr. Jackson. Dentists maintain offices along the avenue. filling cavities and pulling teeth for patients who would otherwise go without care. Pharmacists compound prescriptions in shops that smell of chemicals and herbs. Midwives deliver babies in homes throughout the district. Their knowledge passed down through generations and supplemented by whatever formal training they could access. The system isn't perfect. Resources are limited. Equipment is often outdated. And serious cases sometimes require transport to facilities in Kansas City or beyond. But the system exists, which is more than many black communities can claim. The school year is winding down, and the children of Greenwood prepare for summer with the same mixture of excitement and relief children everywhere feel. Booker T. Washington High School stands as the district's pride, a substantial brick building where black teachers educate black students in subjects ranging from literature to mathematics to vocational skills. The teachers are college educated, many of them graduates of Fisk or Howard or Tuskegee, and they bring to their classrooms a determination that borders on ferocity. These children will learn. These children will succeed. These children will become doctors and lawyers and business owners, will break barriers and build empires, will prove through their very existence that everything white America believes about black capacity is a lie. The education extends beyond the classroom. Every interaction in Greenwood teaches something. At the grocery store, you learn about fair pricing and customer service. At the barbershop, you absorb discussions of politics and philosophy that would rival any university salon. In church, you study history wrapped in theology, messages of hope encoded in scripture. The adults here carry themselves with a certain bearing, a dignity that cannot be legislated away. They pass it down to the children through example, through expectation, through the simple act of treating young people as full human beings worthy of respect. May in Oklahoma is warm, edging toward hot, and the evenings bring a heaviness to the air that makes you move slower, think slower, breathe slower. You sit on the porch of Mrs. Jackson's boarding house, watching fireflies blink in the gathering dusk, and you think about how different this is from where you came from. Not better in every way. The work is hard, the money never quite enough, the shadow of Jim Crow never entirely gone. White Tulsa exists just across those railroad tracks, and its rules apply the moment you cross that invisible line. You have to step off the sidewalk when a white person approaches. You can't try on clothes in department stores. You can't eat at lunch counters or drink from certain fountains or forget, even for a moment, that this prosperity you found exists at the sufferance of people who would prefer you didn't exist at all. But here, on this side of the tracks, you can breathe. You can walk into a restaurant and sit down at any table. You can look a shopkeeper in the eye and be treated like a customer, not a problem. You can dream about the future without the dream curdling into despair. The boundaries still exist, rigid and dangerous, but within them, something beautiful has grown. 35 blocks of possibility, where black dollars support black businesses, support black families, support black dreams. It's not perfect. It's not paradise, but it's yours. The professionals of Greenwood gather sometimes at the home of O.W. Gurley, one of the founders and principal landowners of the district. He arrived in Indian Territory in 1906, purchased 40 acres, and began selling lots to black settlers who wanted to build something of their own. The community grew from that seed, lot by lot, house by house, store by store, until what exists now spreads across more than 36 blocks. At these gatherings, lawyers discuss cases over glasses of lemonade. Doctors share knowledge about new treatments. Businessmen strategize about expansion, about investment, about how to protect what they've built. The conversation is sophisticated, the people accomplished, the atmosphere one of careful optimism. They know what surrounds them. They know the dangers. But they choose to focus on building rather than burning, with fear. Gurley himself operates a rooming house and grocery store, but his real business is land. He owns more property in Greenwood than almost anyone else, and he's used that position to shape the district's development. When a new family arrives looking to settle, Gurley often helps them find a lot, sometimes extending credit to those who can't afford the full purchase price. He's not purely altruistic. The more families that settle, the more his remaining land increases in value. But the effect is the same. More black families own property. More black families build wealth. More black families have stakes in Greenwood's success. The women of Greenwood run much of what makes the district function, even when their names don't appear on the signs. They manage households and raise children and work jobs and maintain the social networks that hold everything together. At the beauty parlors scattered throughout the district, they gather to have their hair pressed and styled, to exchange information and gossip, to strengthen the bonds that make a community more than just a collection of individuals. These aren't frivolous places. They're headquarters, intelligence operations disguised as grooming appointments. A woman sits in the chair, heat from the pressing comb warm against her scalp, and learns which businesses are hiring, which landlords are fair, which white folks can be trusted, and which absolutely cannot. Mabel Little runs one of the most popular beauty shops in the district, a woman who built her business from nothing and now employs half a dozen stylists. She knows everyone's secrets, which means she knows how to keep them. The trust placed in her is enormous, and she honors it absolutely. Her shop becomes a refuge for women who need to talk, to vent, to process the indignities of life under Jim Crow in a space where they won't be judged. The conversations that happen in those chairs probably do more for community mental health than any formal service could provide. The rhythm of commerce pulses through every day. At the produce stands, farmers from the surrounding areas sell vegetables fresh from the soil, tomatoes and okra, and ears of corn still warm from the field. At the meat markets, butchers carve roasts and grind sausage, their aprons stained red by day's end. At the drugstores, pharmacists fill prescriptions and sell patent medicines and penny candy to children who pool their coins for shared treats. The Iceman comes through in his horse-drawn wagon, blocks of frozen water dripping onto the dusty street, and housewives call out their orders from front porches. £25 for the Johnsons, £50 for the rooming house on the corner. The ice goes into wooden boxes lined with zinc, keeping milk and meat from spoiling in the Oklahoma heat. You notice how information moves through the district, faster than seems possible in an age before television or widespread telephone service. Someone's daughter gets engaged, and by evening half of Greenwood knows. A business changes hands, and within hours people are speculating about what the new owner will do differently. A stranger arrives from out of town, and within a day or two, anyone who matters knows their name, their business, their connections. This network serves purposes beyond gossip. When threats appear, warnings spread just as quickly. When opportunities arise, word reaches those who need to hear it. The community watches over itself because no one else will. Saturday nights bring a different energy to Greenwood. The work week is done. Pay packets are heavy in pockets, and the desire for celebration rises like steam from hot pavement. The dance halls fill with couples moving to jazz and blues, bodies pressed close, laughter and music spilling into the streets. The pool halls draw crowds of young men with money to wager and time to waste. The restaurants serve late dinners to families dressed in their second-best clothes, saving the finest outfits for church tomorrow, but still wanting to look presentable tonight. Even Mrs. Jackson's boarding house buzzes with extra energy. Boarders coming and going, doors opening and closing, the smell of pomade and perfume thick in the hallways. You walk the avenue on one of these Saturday nights, and Greenwood feels like the center of the universe. The streetlights glow warm against the darkness. Music drifts from every direction, overlapping melodies that somehow harmonize into a single sound of celebration. People call greetings across the street, pause to chat on corners, duck into establishments, and emerge hours later looking rumpled and happy. A man sells tamales from a cart, the corn husks steaming, the smell of spiced meat making your mouth water. A woman in a red dress laughs at something her companion says, the sound carrying clear and bright. Somewhere, a trumpet climbs a scale and holds a high note that seems to hang suspended in the warm air. The contrast with white, Tulsa grows starker the longer you live here. Across those railroad tracks exists a city that considers itself progressive, modern, a beacon of oil boom prosperity. And yet, that city maintains rigid segregation, refuses to serve black customers, excludes black residents from parks and theaters and public facilities. The laws are explicit, the enforcement is harsh, and somehow, despite this, Greenwood thrives. Or maybe because of it. Forced to create their own institutions, black Tulsans created better ones. Forced to rely on each other, they built networks of mutual support that their white neighbors can't imagine. The oppression meant to crush them instead, forge them into something stronger. Some white Tulsans cross the tracks to spend money in Greenwood, drawn by businesses that offer better service or lower prices than their white counterparts. They come quietly, almost furtively, aware that their presence complicates the neat categories that segregation requires. The blacks, business owners, take their money without comment, because commerce doesn't care about hypocrisy, and every dollar helps. But everyone notices, everyone remembers. The same white customers who spend money in black shops during the day wouldn't lift a finger to help if trouble came. Everyone knows this too. Dr. Jackson's hospital serves patients who have nowhere else to go. The teachers at Booker T. Washington prepare students for futures their parents could only dream of. The lawyers in their offices on Greenwood Avenue fight cases in courtrooms where the deck is stacked against them, and somehow, sometimes win. Every success is a rebuke. Every thriving business says something about capability and worth that polite white society doesn't want to hear. You begin to understand why some white Tulsans look at Greenwood with something other than indifference. That something is fear. June approaches, and the heat intensifies. The days grow long, the sun setting late over the flat Oklahoma landscape. You work your shifts at the print shop, setting type for stories about local events and national news, about businesses opening and couples marrying and babies being born. The newspaper chronicles life in all its ordinary glory, capturing a moment that feels permanent but isn't. Nothing is permanent. You know this. Everyone knows this. But the rhythm of daily life is so steady, so reassuring, that it's easy to forget how fragile everything actually is. At night, you lie in your narrow bed at Mrs. Jackson's and listen to the sounds of Greenwood settling into sleep. The last automobiles rumbling home, the last voices calling goodnights across fence lines, the creak of the house around you, wood expanding and contracting in the cooling air. Through the window, you can see stars bright above the rooftops, the same stars that shine over white Tulsa and over places you've never been and might never see. The sky doesn't know about railroad tracks or segregation or the elaborate hierarchies humans construct to justify cruelty. The sky just is, and under it, for this moment, you just are too. Mrs. Jackson knocks on doors at 6 each morning, her voice firm but not unkind. Breakfast waits on the table, the same eggs and grits and coffee that have started every day since you arrived. The routine has become comfortable, almost beloved. You know which floorboards creak, which chairs wobble, which boarders snore through walls too thin to muffle sound. This place has become home in a way you didn't expect. Not because the room is large or the amenities fine, but because here you belong. Here you are known by name and seen as a person and counted as part of something bigger than yourself. The businesses of Greenwood continue their work, oblivious to what's coming, focused on the tasks at hand. The grocers stock shelves, the barbers sharpen razors, the teachers grade papers and plan lessons for the fall term. Still months away. The doctors see patients, the lawyers file motions, the builders hammer and saw, constructing new structures to house the community's expanding dreams. Everything points forward, toward growth, toward more, toward futures bright with possibility. No one knows that the calendar is counting down to something terrible. Why would they? Life has taught them to build in the face of destruction, to hope despite evidence. It's not naivety, it's survival. On the porches of Greenwood, elders rock in chairs, worn smooth by years of use, and tell stories about worse times than these. They remember slavery, some of them. Or they remember parents who lived through it, who carried the scars and the memories forward like heirlooms. They remember Reconstruction and its failures, the promises made and broken, the violence that followed the brief flowering of black political power. They remember arriving in Indian territory with nothing and building something from that nothing through decades of work. What exists now, this prosperity, this community, feels earned in ways that younger generations can't fully understand. The elders watch Greenwood with pride and also with a deeper knowing. They've seen the wheel turn before. The children of Greenwood run through streets that bear their parents' footprints and will someday bear their own. They attend schools their community built. They buy candy from stores their neighbors own. They dream dreams shaped by the evidence of their own eyes, proof that success is possible, that dignity can be claimed even when the larger world denies it. Some of them will become doctors, some will become teachers, some will leave Oklahoma entirely, carrying Greenwood with them to Chicago, to Los Angeles, to New York, spreading its lessons across the country. The future is unwritten, open, waiting to be shaped by hands not yet grown to full strength. You've been in Greenwood for nearly 2 months now. The work has found its rhythm. The community has opened enough to let you inside. You know, the shopkeepers by name, the shortcuts between blocks, the best place to get a haircut, and the best place to avoid if you're not looking for trouble. You've eaten Sunday dinner at tables belonging to 3 different families, welcomed as the new boarder at Mrs. Jackson's, fed and questioned and ultimately accepted into the informal networks of trust that hold everything together. You've contributed something too, modest but real, the labor of your hands and the coins you spend, and the small acts of neighborliness that build connection. The spring of 1921 is nearly over. Summer stretches ahead, promising heat and celebration, and the ordinary business of living. No one in Greenwood knows that everything is about to change. No one can see the events already in motion across those railroad tracks, the misunderstanding in an elevator, the headline that will spark the flame, the rage that will descend from the sky. For now, there is only this: these streets, these businesses, these people who built something beautiful in the shadow of oppression. 35 blocks of proof that another world is possible. So tonight, as you settle into your own bed with its clean sheets and soft pillow and walls that hold heat at your command, think about what was lost. Not just the buildings, though those were real. Not just the businesses, though those represented lifetimes of work. Not just the money, though the estimates run into millions of dollars never repaid. What was lost was a model, a demonstration, a living answer to every argument ever made about what Black Americans could or couldn't accomplish if given the chance. Greenwood showed what was possible, and then it burned. But the people who built it, the survivors and their descendants, carried the lessons forward. They rebuilt what they could. They remembered what they couldn't. They made sure the story survived even when the bricks and mortar didn't. The spirits of Greenwood don't haunt. They inspire. Every Black-owned business today draws from a tradition that stretches back through generations, through destruction and rebuilding, through setbacks that would break lesser communities. Every child who grows up knowing this history carries something precious, a proof of concept that says, we did this once, we can do it again. No one can take from us what we know to be true about our own worth. The 35 blocks burned, yes, but the idea of them, the dream of them, the fierce insistence that we deserve to thrive, that flame never went out. You close your eyes in Greenwood, in that narrow bed at Mrs. Jackson's boarding house, and you don't know what's coming. None of them did. But what you do know, what you feel in your bones as you drift toward sleep, is that you are part of something. Something built by hands like yours. Something sustained by belief like yours. Something that matters beyond measure. The jazz still plays faintly in the distance. The smell of cooking still drifts on the night air. The stars still wheel overhead, indifferent and eternal. And Greenwood sleeps, dreaming of tomorrow, which will come regardless. It always does. The question is never whether morning arrives. The question is what we do with the light. You're standing in a one-room cabin somewhere in the American South. The year is 1842, and the walls around you are rough-hewn logs chinked with mud and straw. Gaps let in the cold, the mosquitoes, and the faint sounds of the plantation settling into evening. The floor beneath your bare feet is packed dirt, cool and slightly damp. You've been working since before dawn, and every muscle in your body aches with the specific exhaustion that comes from labor that isn't yours to profit from. Your hands are calloused, your back permanently curved from bending, and your skin carries the smell of sweat, earth, and whatever crop defines your existence this season. But tonight, something different stirs in your chest. You've noticed someone whose laugh cuts through the monotony of the fields, someone whose eyes meet yours across the rows of tobacco or rice or cotton. And now you're wondering if maybe, just maybe, there's a way to build something that belongs only to you. Here's the thing about falling in love when you're enslaved. Every tender feeling comes wrapped in terror. Because you don't own yourself. You don't own your time, your body, or your future. And you certainly don't own the right to decide who shares your life. The person you're drawn to might belong to the same enslaver, which is convenient in the cruelest sense. Or they might belong to a neighboring plantation, which means every moment together becomes a negotiation with people who see you as property. You can't court freely. You can't propose on your own terms. Before anything happens, before any promise is made, you need permission. Permission from the person who owns you. Permission from the person who owns them. And those permissions can be denied for any reason or no reason at all. Imagine gathering the courage to approach your enslaver. You stand with your hat in your hands, eyes carefully lowered, voice steady despite the pounding in your chest. You're asking for the right to love someone, and the person you're asking might grant it cheerfully, seeing an opportunity to breed more workers. Or they might deny it because they're in a bad mood, because they have other plans for you, because they simply enjoy the power of saying no. Your entire emotional future hangs on the whim of someone who doesn't consider you fully human. Welcome to courtship in the antebellum South. And even if you receive that precious permission, it can be revoked at any moment. Your enslaver might change their mind next week, next month, next year. The ground beneath your relationship is never stable. It shifts with the moods and finances of people who view your love as an inconvenience at best, an investment opportunity at worst. Let's say permission is granted. Congratulations. Now comes the process of actually building a relationship, which looks nothing like the courtship rituals of free society happening just miles away in the big house. You don't have leisure time. You don't have money to buy gifts. You don't have the luxury of slow Sunday strolls or letters sealed with wax. What you have is stolen moments, a conversation by the well at twilight, a walk together when you're both assigned to the same errand, a glance across the fields that says everything words cannot. These moments are precious because they're rare. You might work 16 hours in a day and have only 15 minutes with the person you love. You learn to compress entire conversations into looks, entire declarations into the brush of fingertips as you pass. The language of love becomes something silent, something the overseers can't quite catch, something that lives in the spaces between words. If the person you love belongs to another plantation, these moments become even more precious and precarious. You might only see them on Sundays, if you're lucky enough to have Sundays off, and if you can get a pass to travel. A pass, a piece of paper that grants you temporary permission to move your own body from one place to another. Without it, you're subject to patrols, those roving groups of white men whose job is to catch enslaved people traveling without authorization. Getting caught could mean a beating. Getting caught repeatedly could mean your courting privileges revoked entirely. So you walk the dark roads with your pass clutched tight, your ears straining for hoofbeats, your heart divided between fear and longing. The night air smells of pine and damp earth. Every snapped twig makes you freeze. Every distant voice sends your heart racing. And yet you keep walking, mile after mile, because at the end of that road is someone worth the risk. The courting rituals that developed in enslaved communities were their own beautiful creations, born from necessity and defiance. You might bring small gifts when you could manage them. A ribbon acquired through trade, a carved wooden comb made with your own hands during precious evening hours when you should have been sleeping. The carving took weeks. Small moments stolen after exhaustion should have claimed you, but you wanted to give something, anything that proved your devotion. You might sing to the person you loved, songs that carried double meanings, songs that spoke of freedom and devotion in the same breath. Music was one thing that couldn't be entirely controlled, and so it became a language of courtship, of hope, of everything that had to stay unspoken in daylight. The melodies drifted through the quarters in the evening, carrying messages that only those who knew the codes could understand. Community elders often played matchmaker, suggesting unions, advising young people, trying to guide relationships towards stability in a world designed to destroy them. These weren't just romantic gestures. They were acts of cultural preservation, ways of maintaining human dignity when the entire system insisted you had none. So you've courted, you've loved, You've navigated the impossible maze of permissions and patrols and stolen moments. Now, you want to make it official. You want to marry. And here's where the cruelty becomes almost absurd in its totality. Your marriage will not be legal. Not in any court. Not in any church that matters to the law. Not in any document that carries weight. You can stand before a preacher, speak vows, exchange promises of forever, and none of it will protect you from being separated tomorrow. The phrase that haunted enslaved marriages was not "till death do us part." It was "till death or distance do us part." Some ceremonies made this explicit, the words spoken aloud as a grim acknowledgement of reality. You're not just promising love. You're promising to love despite the knowledge that any day, any hour, your spouse could be sold away, and you might never see them again. That shadow hangs over every moment of joy, every quiet evening together, every plan you dare to make. The wedding itself, though, was real, deeply, profoundly real. Communities gathered to witness these unions with as much solemnity and joy as any free wedding. The most iconic tradition was jumping the broom. You and your beloved would hold hands, and together you'd leap over a broom laid on the ground. The symbolism varied by community. Some said it represented sweeping away the old and starting fresh. Others connected it to African traditions carried across the water in memory and adapted to new soil. What mattered was that it meant something. It created a moment that belonged to you, that the enslaver could witness but never truly own. The broom itself might be decorated with ribbons if ribbons could be found, or simply left plain, a working tool transformed into a sacred object by the intention behind the leap. The height of your jump, some believed, predicted the balance of power in your marriage. Jump high, and you'd have a partnership of equals. Stumble, and perhaps one would lead more than the other. People laughed at this, but they also watched carefully. After the jump, there might be music, dancing, food, if it could be gathered. A feast made from whatever could be saved or grown, or quietly taken from the big house kitchen. Sweet potatoes maybe, cornbread. If someone had managed to catch a possum or rabbit, there might even be meat. You'd eat together, your community surrounding you, their presence a form of protection. A promise that even if the law didn't recognize your union, they did. The taste of that food, whatever it was, would stay with you. Years later, you'd remember the exact flavor of that cornbread, the way the firelight caught your beloved's face, the sound of voices raised in song as the night deepened around you. Someone might play a fiddle or a banjo, instruments crafted from gourds and animal hide, sounds that carried memories of Africa adapted to American soil. The dancing would last until exhaustion claimed everyone, until even the joy of celebration couldn't overcome the knowledge that dawn would bring another day of labor. But not everyone got even this much. Some enslavers refused to allow ceremonies at all, seeing them as dangerous. Indulgences that gave enslaved people ideas about autonomy. Others insisted on presiding over the weddings themselves, turning what should have been a moment of joy into another display of control. Imagine standing there, speaking your vows, while the person who owns you watches with proprietary satisfaction, knowing that they see this moment not as your love story, but as a transaction, a breeding arrangement, an investment in future laborers. The intimacy of the moment invaded by the gaze of power. Your words feel hollow even as you mean them with everything you have. Some couples chose to marry in secret, conducting their own ceremonies in the quarters after dark, witnessed only by those they trusted. These hidden marriages were acts of rebellion, assertions of humanity that didn't require white approval to be valid. The risk of discovery was real, but so was the need for something that belonged entirely to you. Your wedding night is nothing like what free couples experience. There's no honeymoon, no privacy, no time set aside for the beginning of your new life together. Tomorrow, you'll both be back in the fields at dawn, your bodies belonging to someone else's profit. If you're lucky and you both belong to the same plantation, you might share a cabin now. More likely, you'll squeeze into space that already houses others, your wedding bed separated from the rest of the room by nothing more than a hung blanket, if you have one to spare. The cabin is small, maybe 12 feet by 12 feet, and it holds your entire married life. Cooking happens at the fireplace in the corner, smoke staining the low ceiling black. Sleep happens on a pallet stuffed with corn husks or moss, the rustling following every movement you make. Intimacy happens in whispered darkness, always aware of the thin walls, the nearby bodies, the complete absence of anything resembling solitude. The smell of smoke never quite leaves the air. The sound of others breathing, coughing, shifting in. Their sleep becomes the soundtrack of your marriage. You learn to find privacy in small ways, in moments, in the particular silence that falls when everyone pretends not to hear. If your spouse belongs to another plantation, your reality is something called an abroad marriage. Congratulations, you're married to someone you might see once a week, if everything goes perfectly. Your husband or wife lives miles away, and every visit requires permission, travel, and timing that never quite works in your favor. You spend your nights alone in your cabin, missing someone you're legally bound to in the eyes of your community, but completely separated from in practice. The empty space beside you on the pallet feels like an accusation. You lie awake listening to the sounds of the quarters, wondering if your spouse is doing the same, wondering if they're safe, wondering when you'll see them again. Sundays become everything. You wake before dawn to walk the distance, arriving with just enough time to share a meal, talk about the week, hold each other for precious hours before you have to leave again. The walk back is always harder than the walk there, each step taking you further from the person you love, the darkness deeper, the silence heavier. Some couples in abroad marriages only saw each other monthly. Some, during busy seasons, went even longer. The loneliness was its own form of torture, loving someone you couldn't reach, building a family you couldn't live with, and children. Let's talk about children, because this is where the horror becomes almost unbearable to contemplate. You want a family. You want the normal human experience of raising children with the person you love. But every child you bring into the world is born into slavery. Your baby, from their first breath, belongs to whoever owns you. They're recorded in ledgers alongside livestock, their names written in the same ink that tracks horses and cattle. Their value is assessed based on health, future labor, potential, and how much they might fetch at auction. You hold your newborn in your arms, smell that particular sweetness of baby skin, feel their fingers curl around yours, and you know with absolute certainty that you have no power to protect them. They can be sold at any age. Mothers were separated from nursing infants, their milk still flowing as they were loaded onto carts headed elsewhere. Toddlers were taken from families and sent to different plantations. Children old enough to work were especially vulnerable to sale, their growing bodies representing value that enslavers were eager to capitalize on. The specific cruelty of this system is hard to overstate. You love your children with the same fierce, all-consuming love that any parent feels. But that love comes with constant grinding fear. Every time an enslaver has financial troubles, you wonder if your child will be the one sold to cover debts. Every time a stranger visits the plantation, you watch their eyes and pray, They're not here to buy. You try to prepare your children for a world that will treat them as property, teaching them survival skills, obedience strategies, the careful art of navigating white authority without losing themselves entirely. You want to give them hope, but you also have to give them realism. Some parents made the agonizing choice not to name their children immediately, waiting to see if the infant would survive the brutal conditions of early life. Others poured extra meaning into names, choosing words that carried prayers and aspirations in the languages the enslavers couldn't understand. A name was sometimes the only inheritance you could guarantee. You whispered it over your child in the darkness, a secret gift that couldn't be taken away. Mothers faced particular horrors. Pregnancy offered no relief from labor. You worked in the fields until your body could no longer manage it, your belly swelling beneath the sun, your back screaming with a pain that had no remedy. Then, you returned to work as soon as possible after giving birth, sometimes within days. Some women delivered babies in the fields themselves, surrounded by other workers who helped however they could, before overseers demanded everyone return to their tasks. The dirt beneath you, the sky above, and a circle of women who understood because they'd been there too. Nursing was complicated by work schedules. Some plantations had nurseries where infants were left during the day, tended by elderly women too old for field work. You might have only brief periods to nurse your child, rushing from the fields when permitted, your body aching both from labor and from the fullness of milk. The bond between mother and child formed under these conditions was no less powerful for being constrained. If anything, the precariousness intensified the devotion. Every moment with your child felt borrowed, stolen, precious beyond measure. Let's say the worst happens. Let's say you wake up one morning and discover that your spouse or your child has been sold. Maybe there was warning. Rumors that traveled through the quarters, whispered from cabin to cabin in the darkness. Maybe you had a few days to say goodbye, to hold each other one last time, to make promises you both knew couldn't be kept. You tried to memorize everything, the exact shade of their eyes, the sound of their laugh, the way they moved, walked, breathed. You pressed these details into your memory like flowers into a book, trying to preserve something that was about to be destroyed. Or maybe there was no warning at all. Your husband went to the fields as usual and simply didn't return. Your daughter was taken while you were working, her small body loaded onto a cart that disappeared down the road before anyone could tell you. You came back to the cabin and found only absence. The grief of this separation was considered one of the deepest sufferings of slavery. Formerly enslaved people who later recorded their stories described it in terms usually reserved for death, because it was a kind of death. Your family member still existed somewhere in the world, still breathed and walked and maybe thought of you, but they were as lost to you as if they'd been buried in the ground. More painful, perhaps, because death has finality. Separation has hope, that thin, cruel thread of hope that maybe someday, somehow, you'll find each other again. The auction block was where many of these separations happened. If you've ever seen depictions of slave auctions, you might think you understand. You don't. Imagine standing on a platform while strangers examine your body, your teeth, your muscle tone. Hands that you don't want touching you, turning your face, squeezing your arms, making you walk back and forth like an animal at market. Now imagine watching your child stand on that same platform while someone evaluates their worth in dollars. Your child, who you taught to walk, whose tears you wiped, whose laughter was the only good thing in your days. Families pleaded to be sold together. Sometimes these pleas were ignored entirely. Sometimes they were used as leverage to drive prices up. A mother willing to do anything to stay with her children might fetch more money if sold to someone who promised not to separate them, promises that were rarely kept. The sounds of these auctions, the crying, the shouting of prices, the final crack of the auctioneer's voice declaring sold, haunted survivors for the rest of their lives. Those sounds echoed in dreams, surfacing unexpectedly at moments of quiet, a trauma that never quite healed. Some families did find each other. After emancipation, newly freed people placed advertisements in newspapers, desperately searching for loved ones sold away years or decades before. These ads are heartbreaking documents. They describe distinguishing features, last known locations, the names of former enslavers. They represent the continuation of love across impossible distances and years. Information about Sam, my husband, sold from me in Richmond in 1853. He had a scar over his left eye and walked with a slight limp. Any information would be gratefully received. These advertisements ran for years, some for decades, their authors refusing to give up hope. Some searches succeeded. Husbands and wives reunited after 20, 30 years apart. Parents found children who'd grown into adults they didn't recognize. The stories of these reunions are almost unbearably moving. People who had carried each other in memory for decades, finally able to touch, to speak, to confirm that the other person had survived. But many searches ended in silence. The loved one had died, moved too far to be traced, or simply vanished into the vast cruelty of the system. Some people searched until their own deaths, never finding, never knowing. But here's what the history of enslaved marriage also teaches us. And this is the part that might help you sleep tonight rather than lie awake in horror. People loved anyway. They married anyway. They had children anyway, despite knowing what those children would face. They built communities, created traditions, maintained hope against all evidence that hope was reasonable. The wedding ceremonies continued. The courting rituals evolved and adapted. The jumping of brooms happened in thousands of secret and public moments across the South, each one a declaration that love was stronger than law, that humanity couldn't be owned even when bodies could. Enslaved people didn't have the luxury of giving up on love because the circumstances were bad. They chose connection precisely because everything around them demanded isolation. They built families because family was resistance. Every marriage was an act of faith in a future that the system said shouldn't exist for them. The marriages themselves often showed remarkable resilience. Couples who'd been together for decades developed partnerships that distributed labor, shared resources, and provided mutual support in ways that made survival slightly more possible. Husbands might tend small gardens in evening hours, growing food to supplement the inadequate rations provided by enslavers. The smell of those gardens, rich earth and growing things, became the smell of hope itself. Collard greens, sweet potatoes, black-eyed peas, crops that could sustain bodies the system wanted to break. Wives might sew, mend, and create from scraps the small comforts that made cabin life bearable. A quilt pieced together from worn-out clothes became more than warmth. It became a record of family, each patch holding memories. Together, they created households that functioned despite every structural force working against them. They raised children who knew they were loved, even when they couldn't be protected. They built communities that remembered birthdays and anniversaries, that mourned separations and celebrated reunions, that maintained the social fabric the system tried to tear apart. Religion played a complex role in these marriages. Many enslaved people adopted Christianity, sometimes forced, sometimes chosen, and often transformed into something the white churches wouldn't recognize. In the hidden spaces of the slave quarters, preachers who were themselves enslaved conducted services that blended African traditions with Christian theology. These gatherings were illegal, dangerous, and essential. Hush harbors, they were sometimes called, secret worship spaces in the woods or swamps, where voices could be raised without white ears hearing. The God they worshipped understood suffering. The heaven they imagined promised reunion with separated loved ones. The marriage ceremonies conducted by these preachers carried spiritual weight that transcended legal invisibility. When an enslaved preacher pronounced a couple married, the community believed it, and that belief created reality. Not legal reality, but something perhaps more durable. A spiritual bond that couldn't be dissolved by sale or distance. The words spoken over those unions echoed in hearts long after the ceremonies ended, long after separations tore families apart, long after everything else was taken away. The physical intimacy of enslaved marriage happened in conditions that made privacy nearly impossible. Your cabin was small, crowded, and offered no separation between daily life and intimate moments. Children might sleep on pallets, feet away from where parents lay together. Other families might share the same structure, their blanket walls the only boundary between households. The sounds of the night, creaking wood, wind through gaps, the movements of others, became a kind of privacy themselves, covering what needed to be covered. And yet intimacy happened. People found ways to create moments of connection, to maintain the physical relationship that was part of their bond. They developed signals, understood silences, learned each other's rhythms in ways that transcended the cramped conditions. The resourcefulness required to sustain a marriage under these conditions speaks to both the strength of enslaved people and the cruelty of a system that denied them even basic human privacy. Some enslavers actively interfered in the intimate lives of enslaved couples. The practice of forced breeding was real and horrifying. Enslaved women were sometimes paired with men not of their choosing, their bodies treated as reproductive resources. Enslaved men were sometimes used as studs, forced to father children with multiple women regardless of their own marriages. These practices existed alongside and in tension with the marriages enslaved people chose for themselves. A woman might be married to a man she loved while simultaneously being violated by the enslaver or forced to bear children with others. The psychological torture of this dual existence, trying to maintain a genuine marriage while having no control over your own body, represents one of slavery's deepest cruelties. And yet marriages survived even this. Couples found ways to maintain their bond, despite violations that would seem to make such bonds impossible. The love persisted, carrying wounds, but persisting nonetheless. Let's move through a typical day in an enslaved marriage, because the rhythm of daily life is where love actually lived. You wake before dawn to the sound of the horn or bell that signals the start of work. The cabin is cold, the fire burned down to embers, and the darkness outside is absolute. Your spouse is beside you, warm in the brief moment before the cold reality of the day begins. Maybe you have time to speak a few words. Maybe you simply look at each other, that look containing everything you can't say aloud. A touch of hands, quick and secret, before you're both up, moving, preparing for labor that will consume the next 12 to 16 hours. If you're lucky, you work near each other. You might catch glimpses throughout the day, exchange a word. During water breaks, know that the other person is present, even if you can't be together. If you're unlucky, your work takes you to different parts of the plantation, and the day becomes an exercise in waiting, enduring, counting hours until evening. Evening brings its own challenges. You return to the cabin exhausted, hungry, with barely enough energy to prepare food from the meager rations you've been given. The rations themselves were calculated to provide just enough sustenance to keep you working, nothing more. Maybe you have a small garden plot, tended in whatever fragments of time you can steal from sleep. The vegetables from that garden make the difference between adequate nutrition and constant hunger. You cook together, or one cooks, while the other handles the endless small tasks of survival. Children need attention, the cabin needs maintenance. There's always something worn that needs mending. And yet, within this exhaustion, there are moments. A touch as you pass each other in the small space. A joke that makes you both laugh despite everything. The comfort of sleeping beside someone who knows you, who shares your burden, who loves you in a world that insists you're unlovable. These moments were what people lived for. Not grand gestures, but small intimacies that proved humanity persisted. Sundays, for those who had them off, became sacred time for marriages. It was the one day when labor might pause, when couples could actually spend hours together rather than minutes. If you were in an abroad marriage, Sunday was when you traveled to be with your spouse, setting out in the darkness to maximize your time together. If you lived together, Sunday was when you could actually talk, plan, dream. Some couples spent Sundays attending religious services together, their shared faith another bond strengthening the marriage. Others spent the day on their own small projects, building up the household, caring for children, trying to accumulate the tiny fragments of stability the system otherwise denied. The quality of light on a Sunday afternoon felt different. The air tasted of something almost like freedom. You could sit with your spouse, really sit, without the overseer's eye, without the relentless demand of labor, and remember what it meant to be fully human together. The community surrounding an enslaved marriage was itself a crucial support system. Older women advised younger wives, sharing knowledge about childbirth, about managing households on nothing, about surviving the unsurvivable. Experienced fathers counseled new husbands, teaching them how to protect families they had no legal right to protect. When couples fought, which they did because they were human and stress was constant and resources were scarce, community members often mediated. When children misbehaved, the whole community might participate in discipline and instruction. The phrase "it takes a village" wasn't an abstraction. It was survival strategy. Your marriage existed within a web of relationships that sustained it, celebrated it, and mourned when it was torn apart. These communities developed their own standards for marriage, their own expectations for husbands and wives, their own ways of handling divorce and separation that operated entirely outside white legal systems. Some marriages did end by choice rather than force. The stresses of enslaved life broke some couples. Infidelity happened, sometimes chosen and sometimes coerced. Some people simply grew apart, their initial connection unable to survive years of grinding hardship. Community responses to these situations varied, but generally there were established ways to handle marital dissolution that allowed both parties to move on, potentially remarrying within the community. These weren't formal divorces in any legal sense, but they were recognized separations that allowed people to rebuild their lives. The community witnessed these endings just as they witnessed beginnings, providing structure and meaning in a world that offered neither. As you lie in your own bed tonight, comfortable and free in ways those enslaved couples never were, think about what they built. They created functional marriages without any legal protection. They raised children to be resilient despite knowing those children might be stolen. They maintained hope despite constant evidence that hope was foolish. They loved deeply, truly, with the full force of human emotion, in circumstances designed to make love impossible. Every wedding ceremony was an act of defiance. Every child born to married parents was a statement of faith in the future. Every couple that stayed together through separations, losses, and daily degradations proved that human connection can survive nearly anything. After emancipation, one of the first things freed people did was formalize their marriages. They lined up at churches and courthouses to have ceremonies that now carried legal weight. They took surnames, often choosing new ones that symbolized their freedom: Freeman, Liberty, Justice. Names that meant something after generations of being named by others. They searched desperately for family members sold away. They built households finally protected by law, finally free from the threat of separation by sale. But they also carried with them the traditions developed in slavery. The jumping of the broom continued, not out of necessity, but out of honor for what their ancestors had created. The community-centered approach to marriage persisted. The deep understanding that love is an act of resistance never quite faded. The stories that survived tell us about individuals whose names we know. They tell us about couples reunited after decades apart, about children who found parents they'd last seen as toddlers, about marriages that endured 40 years of separation and then continued for decades more. These stories are extraordinary, but they represent something ordinary too. They represent the basic human need for connection, for family, for love. That need couldn't be legislated away. It couldn't be beaten out. It couldn't be destroyed by systems designed specifically to destroy it. The enslaved people who married each other, who built families, who loved despite everything, were doing what humans have always done. They were just doing it under conditions that made every act of love simultaneously an act of impossible courage. So tonight, as you drift toward sleep in your own bed, in your own home, free to love whoever you choose and protected by laws that recognize your humanity, spare a thought for those who loved without any of those protections. Their marriages were real. Their families were real. Their love was as profound and complicated and beautiful as any love has ever been. They built something lasting out of stolen moments and jumped brooms and whispered vows in crowded cabins. They created traditions that survive to this day. They proved that even the most brutal systems cannot fully control the human heart. And maybe that's the most important thing to carry with you into dreams tonight. The knowledge that love has always found a way. Even in the darkest chapters of human history, people held onto each other, built families, maintained hope. They did it without guarantees, without protections, without any assurance that tomorrow wouldn't bring catastrophic loss. They did it because love is what makes us human. And humanity, as it turns out, is remarkably hard to destroy.